Coming up on The World Today, Ethiopians head to the poll in what Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has described as the country's first free and fair elections. Iran's president-elect Ibrahim Raisi welcomes negotiations with world powers aimed at reviving the 2015 nuclear deal, only if they cover the country's national interest. Plus, thousands of Americans without power as severe thunderstorms tear through the Chicago area of Illinois. Thanks for joining us on the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. It's been a long time coming. Ethiopians were finally able to go to the polls today for general elections. Elections held in most parts of the country, with the exception of Tigray and some other areas, which had witnessed conflict over the past few months and hunger, although Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed denies this is the case. The latest we're hearing now from the head of the Electoral Board, Biritukan Mideska, has told the ruling Prosperity Party to refrain from unnecessary involvement in the election after allegations of interference by opposition parties. Here's more.
Voters lined up early in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, on Monday to vote in national and regional elections. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had billed the poll as proof of his commitment to democracy after decades of repressive rule.
More than anything, I will vote for a party which I think will bring peace for our country, and I have finalized my decision on who to vote for.
In the last election, before Abiy came to power, the ruling coalition and its allies won all 547 seats in parliament. This time, more than 37 million of Ethiopia's 109 million population are registered to vote, choosing from 46 parties. Candidates in the crowded field are mostly from smaller, ethnically based parties, and Abiy's newly formed Prosperity Party is the front runner. Prime Minister Abiy, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, has overseen sweeping political and economic reforms since being appointed leader of Ethiopia's ruling coalition 3 years ago. But some rights activists say those gains are being reversed and complain of abuses and a war in Ethiopia's Tigray region. However, the government denies the charges, and some political parties are also boycotting the vote, alleging intimidation. Problems with voting registration and simmering ethnic violence have delayed voting in a fifth of constituencies, and a second round of voting will take place in September.
Staying with the election in Ethiopia, the UN Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet says she is deeply concerned by continued reports of rights violations in Tigray, including executions of civilians, sexual violence against children, and forced displacement. Her remarks came at the start of a 3-week session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, during which she expects an ongoing probe into abuses there to conclude in August and be made public.
In the Tigray region of Ethiopia, I'm deeply disturbed by continued reports of serious violation of international humanitarian law and gross human rights violation and abuses against civilians by all parties to the conflict, including extrajudicial executions, arbitrary arrests and detentions, sexual violence against children as well as adults, and forced displacement. Credible reports indicate that Eritrean soldiers are still operating in Tigray and continue to perpetrate violations of human rights and humanitarian law. The humanitarian situation is dire, with reports of denial of humanitarian access in some localities and looting of aid supplies by soldiers. An estimated 350,000 people are threatened by famine. The investigation we are jointly conducting in Tigray with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is underway, with teams on the ground since the 16th of May. We expect this work to conclude in August, and the findings and recommendations will be made public.
Let's turn to political events in Europe now. The Spanish government has confirmed plans to pardon Catalan separatists this week. The 9 leaders were jailed for sedition over a failed independence attempt back in 2017. Another 3 were found guilty of disobedience but were not jailed. Their pardons are expected in the cabinet tomorrow. Thousands of people had protested against the plans earlier this month, but the government says the move will help calm tensions over Catalonia. A semi-autonomous region's drive for for independence almost 4 years ago plunged Spain into its biggest political crisis in 40 years. Opponents, however, have accused the Spanish government of using the plans to gain political support. And over in Sweden, the parliament has passed a no-confidence vote on Prime Minister Stefan Löfven. A nationalist Sweden Democrats had seized the chance to call the vote last week after the formerly communist Left Party withdrew its support for centre-left government over a plan to ease rent controls for new-build apartments. Mr. Löfven says he will now Mr. Löfven's minority coalition with the Green Party had relied on support in Parliament from two small centre-right parties since a tight election back in 2018. The Prime Minister says he will now hold discussions with other parties and decide whether to resign or call snap elections within 1 week.
We have a totally new landscape. First, a left party that acts before the government actually proposes something. They never said that after the election 2018. And the second is that this left party now joined forces with extreme right parties, and that means that we have a totally new landscape. That is what has happened.
More on international politics. So Belarus, the United Nations is calling attention to the country's human rights situation, which it says continues to deteriorate, marked by raids on activists and independent media and allegations of torture. The government of Alexander Lukashenko has discounted the presence of the UN's human rights chief's senior advisor in Minsk, which it says provided cooperation.
The situation in Belarus also continues to deteriorate, with severe restrictions on civic space, including the rights to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association, raids against civil society and independent media, and the judicial persecution of human rights activists and journalists. We continue to receive numerous allegations of arbitrary arrests and detentions, torture and ill treatment. Our examination of the situation in Belarus, pursuant to Resolution 46/20, is underway. I regret that, for its part, the government has chosen to discontinue the presence of our senior human rights advisor in Minsk, a position which provided a significant point of engagement and a window for cooperation.
In the meantime, the European Union is set to impose travel bans and asset freezes on 86 Belarusian individuals and companies, but will leave the decision on when to impose economic sanctions to leaders. Diplomats say in an attempt to put more pressure on President Alexander Lukashenko over the forced landing of a Ryanair passenger plane in Minsk on May 23rd, the individual sanctions will hit 76 Belarusians, including the transport and defense ministers, as well as 8 state entities. The measures could be in coordination with similar sanctions by other Western countries, such as Britain and the United States, although they did not have details.
So today for this meeting in Luxembourg, first thing is to talk about Belarus. We are going to first have a meeting with the Belarusian leader, Ms. Tikhanovskaya. He will explain the situation in the country. It will be a debate, and then we will approve the package of new sanctions, which is a wider package. I think it's about 86 people or entities, not only people but also entities. And then we will also discuss about the economic sanctions, which will be presented to the European Council.
Once again, we hear from the human rights chief on Russia today. She criticized the country for outlawing groups linked to jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, labeling them as extremists. She called on Moscow to uphold fundamental civil and political freedoms.
I call on Russia to uphold civil and political rights. Legislation restricting the freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association should be brought in line with international human rights norms and standards. I further urge the authorities to end the arbitrary practice of labeling ordinary individuals, journalists and non-governmental organizations as extremists, foreign agents or undesirable organizations.
We're continuing with our other lead story today, which is Iran's new president-elect Ibrahim Raisi, who says he's in no hurry to schedule meetings with the United States President Joe Biden over a new nuclear deal. As he says, current sanctions have first to be lifted. He says the U.S. had violated the deal and the European Union had failed to fulfill its commitments. Iranian and Western officials alike say Raisi's rise is unlikely to alter Iran's negotiations in talks to revive the nuclear deal. Iran's hardline supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei already has a final say on all major policy. Negotiations, however, have been ongoing in Vienna since April to work out how Iran and the United States can both return to compliance with the nuclear pact, which Washington abandoned in 2018 under then-President Donald Trump, and then reimpose sanctions on Iran. Iran has subsequently breached the deal's limit on enrichment of uranium, designed to minimize the risk of it developing nuclear weapons potential. Tehran has long denied having any such ambition. Well, staying with the story, though, Iran's foreign minister spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh says it's time for action and sealing the 2015 nuclear agreement with world powers, not further negotiation or discussion on any deal. Addressing a press conference earlier today, he said he was hopeful a new deal could be reached by all, but he says the United States must return to compliance with the nuclear pact to reach any signed agreement, adding that a nuclear deal will never be discussed or negotiated. Remember Sheikha Latifa, one of the daughters of the ruler of Dubai, who had once been the subject of concern from a United Nations panel after being seized trying to flee the sheikhdom back in 2018 and had not been seen in public since. Well, new videos were sprung purportedly showing her enjoying herself. A lawyer for the group which campaigned for her freedom says she appears to be enjoying increasing freedom now and is traveling. That image you see is from her Instagram account. It shows her apparently abroad. He also says Latifa appears to have a passport and the ability to travel abroad, where very positive developments.
These are positive developments. They can only be seen as that. From the previous situation of being held in a jail and then being held in a jail villa, to being able to go to the cinema and now seemingly being able to have a passport and to travel to a foreign country, they are very, very positive developments.
We have more coming up on the world today, including this story. Well, it's already being called the Volocopter. You can just call it the air taxi. Today it took its first flight in France. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. The British government has denied hosting the G7 summit in Carbis Bay, Cornwall, was to blame for the rise in infections in the country. Prime Minister's official spokesperson says attendees were tested before and throughout the summit. Here's a global update.
Yes, so we agitate it gently.
Staying in the UK, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says that travellers will face hassle and delays this year if they sought to go abroad, because the priority will be keeping the country safe from the coronavirus. Asked if the government was looking to ease the rules for those who have been double vaccinated, Mr. Johnson says that the government is looking at the option and that it was looking good for July 19th to be the terminus point for coronavirus restrictions in Britain, but did not flatly rule out the possibility of further lockdowns in the future.
When it comes to travel, we'll certainly be looking at that, but I want to stress that this is going to be, whatever happens, a difficult year for travel. There will be hassle, there will be delays, I'm afraid, because the priority has got to be to keep the country safe and to stop the virus coming back in.
So no guarantees on exemption from quarantine from travellers who are double jabbed?
We're looking at it, but I want to stress that the emphasis is going to be on making sure that we can protect the country from the virus coming back in.
The Kremlin has described the coronavirus situation in Russia as difficult and says it's still deteriorating rather than getting better. The country reported 17,611 new COVID cases on Sunday, including 305 in Moscow, taking the official national tally since the pandemic began to beyond 5.3 million. Residents, however, do not seem worried about COVID-19, and some say they would prefer not to get vaccinated, as well as not wearing masks and gloves. Brazilian health authorities have kicked off a mass inoculation program on the island of Paqueta to test vaccine efficacy in different stages and the forming of large-scale immunization, just as the country recorded more than 500,000 COVID-19 deaths. With a spike in cases, the country is hoping to ward off infections with mass inoculations, scheduled to be completed in 8 weeks. The vaccination drive is designed to track the blood samples of the people involved to see if the vaccines are safe and if one dose alone could effectively curb the transmission. Finally, in the United States, leading epidemiologist Dennis Carroll has affirmed the trustworthiness of a study indicating that COVID-19 may have appeared in the United States earlier than the documented infection. A recent research study done by the National Institutes of Health shows that infection began in the United States at a low level as early as December 2019. The study is based on the 24,000 blood samples collected at the beginning of 2020.
Away from the COVID pandemic, but lingering a little longer in the United States, the weather has been anything but pleasant, with storms leaving destruction and deaths in their wake. The latest is a severe storm that tore through the Chicago area of Illinois on Sunday night, after the National Weather Service said a confirmed large and extremely dangerous tornado had touched down in a western suburb of the city, causing damage. Chicago Area Utility Commonwealth Edison's website showed that more than 22,000 customers were without power as the thunderstorm swept through the region near Lake Michigan in the north of the U.S. state of Illinois. The tornado touched down near Route 53 to 75th Street in Woodridge, DuPage County. On Sunday, about a dozen homes were damaged, as you see there, and 4 people were rushed to area hospitals with minor injuries, according to local media. Let's talk to our correspondent, Maria Bird. She's in Washington. Maria, people are supposed to be looking forward to the summer by now, and yet nature decides to destroy rather than nourish and renew. What's the weatherman telling you? Could this get much worse? See that there was also a storm in Alabama over the weekend in which 10 people were killed and in a multiple car crash due to floods.
Amarachi, thank you so much for having me. Yes, you're exactly correct. This is the time of year where people are looking to be able to enjoy themselves. But I will say that as we hit to the July months, it does have some severe weather, whether or not you're in the central part of the country or even the western or the eastern part. We do have severe weather, especially those thunderstorms. When we have these extreme heat days, the thunderstorms do put a major stress on our electrical systems. We all know that we are in the midst of getting ready for a new infrastructure bill, which will begin to address some of our very aging infrastructure that causes major issues when we do have these type of severe storms and severe weather.
So over the weekend, we've seen storms in Alabama, we've seen in Chicago, and what other parts of the United States are they also experiencing bad weather? Looking at the weather report, there appears to be sunny days ahead, though. Could that change suddenly?
You're correct. We are looking for sunny days ahead, but on the eastern region, there is severe weather today as far as the heat. We're looking at close to 100 degrees, which is a bit hot for the eastern region. And so as a result of that, we are expecting some storms. And when those storms come, we could be seeing power outages. We could be seeing some other issues that could come into play with that. So, you see sunny one day, but unfortunately, it doesn't mean that you will see sunny for the whole rest of the week. So it's just a time of year where people have to kind of hunker down and enjoy the heat or enjoy the great weather, because it could be within 24 to 48 hours. It could be very different.
Yeah, and I kind of think that people in Chicago may have expected that storm. The Chicago weather, known as the Windy City, of course, weather changes rapidly. But how are people preparing for the changes ahead that you just talked about? When you combine this with the pandemic that's still in the country, as the country struggles with the Delta variant that's threatening even to infect more Americans?
You're correct. And what that really means, especially when you're talking about those individuals who are on the lower income bracket, because we have experience in seeing where many apartment buildings or areas where you have a large number of individuals living in one facility, and if the air condition does go out or they're not able to have access to the energy because of the power outages, we are seeing where those are becoming areas where we're really focusing in on the vaccines for anyone 12 and up being able to be vaccinated, because you're in close proximity and you really don't have great ventilation systems when our energy is compromised. So that is going to be very key, really pushing forward with vaccinations, and the president is looking for a 70% of all adults being vaccinated by the 4th of July holiday. And so if that is put in place, as you mentioned, the Delta variant, which is quickly coming into the U.S., but if we are able to be vaccinated, hopefully we will not see some of the extreme measures and hospital rates going up again.
All prayers are up for those who have been affected by the storms. Maria, thanks for speaking with us, and do stay safe.
Thank you.
It's time to talk about that helicopter. The German company performed today a first flight of its electrical air taxi in France at a show in Le Bourget Airport near Paris, with the objective to have a service in operation for Olympic Games in the country in 2024. The flying taxi, which looks like a tiny helicopter, took off and landed vertically over the Bourget Airport with no passenger on board. During a 3-minute flight, it flew 500 meters route at speeds up to 30 kilometers per hour and 30 meters high along the airfield. It has a luggage compartment, interestingly, and a capacity of 2 people on board.
Packs, and then you can easily exchange these battery packs. So we've made them in a way that we can store them. Of course, in later versions we want this fully automated.
It looks really cute, just like a drone, and as my producers are talking in my ear, that will work very differently in Nigeria. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.